that I think has an undercurrent common factor with one another. The first involves the story of a goddess who comes down from the heavens to the earth to dwell with mortals. This goddess is invisible, but everywhere she goes, you can see the effects of her walk. So, for example, when she passes by a forest that has been charred by a fire, everything springs back to life. The forest becomes green again and teems with birds and grasses. When this invisible goddess walks the wooden knolls of the forest, violets spring up in her footsteps. When she passes by a stagnant pool filled with moss and mosquitoes, it instantly becomes a bubbling brook of fresh, sweet water. Everywhere she goes has positive effects. She goes over hill and dell, and it gets green again. She goes over parched valleys and fields, and they spring fruit and life. That's the story of one tale in Greek mythology. The other involves the story of a Greek mythological character of a king who has a daughter, a princess, that is given by treaty to a rival king in marriage. This princess is as beautiful as Aphrodite and has breath that smells like the sweetest perfume. The only problem is, within her is the contagion of death and decay. Her breath is toxic, so she blows on a swarm of insects and they drop dead to the ground. An errant bird passes by and she says hello to it, and it falls to its death. She plucks a flower from the flower garden, breathes in and exhales, and it withers in her hands. And what has happened is, from a child, we learn from this mythological story, she has been slowly fed poison. And so when she is given in marriage to the rival king, every kiss she gives him is a slow killer. Both of these fables teach the principle of effect or effectiveness. And that is really behind the thrust of the passage that Chris just read to us, Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16, where we find ourselves this morning. Effectiveness in this world, the result of having an influence in culture. Which brings up a provocative question. Can the church have a positive effect on unbelieving culture today? Or maybe I should personalize it. Can Calvary Baptist Church of Lenexa at 8130 really have a powerful influence on unbelieving culture? We look out at unbelieving culture and we see we're up against a large foe. Today, we face an entire generation that was born into social media, and they know nothing without it. Try to go talk to a teenage girl and say hi to her. She won't respond. She'll mutter. It's the rudest thing I've ever seen in my life. But it's because of the effects of social media. I've told my chiropractic friend, in 10 years, you're going to have great job security because everyone's neck is going to hurt because they're looking down all the time. This is what social media has done. For all of its good, has bred an entire generation that is incapable of having personal, one-on-one, proper dialogue without hiding behind their phone and tweeting rude statements. Or we look at what we're doing to human life, how every year our society still butchers 1 to 1.5 million babies in the womb. And then what do we do to our seniors in culture but hope that they go away and just expire and not be a burden on the healthcare system? And then now we're facing with transgenderism, the greatest barbary butchery of our time. A complete and direct attack on God the Creator. And the church will have to pick up the pieces when this massacre that has obliterated not only bodies but taking souls of people, in the next 10 years the church will have to pick up the pieces. Or corruption at the highest levels of society, or how we treat one another just in dialogue, how we take care of the poor, how we take care of orphans in our country, and on we could go. This is the culture that we're up against. A culture where more marriages end in divorce, a culture of drugs, a culture of sex trafficking. This is the culture that we face. How on earth can Calvary Baptist Church, little old us, have an effect and an influence? But these are the words of Jesus, and it must be so. And I'm a big believer that it can and should be so. And so now we transition into this wonderful Sermon on the Mount. Thus far in the preamble, the Beatitudes, we have really looked at the change that Jesus effects on us personally in calling people to His kingdom from heaven come on earth, in believing Him to be the Messiah. There is a change that affects us individually. And we've seen that over the course of the last few months. Now people who have been changed by Jesus are peaceable people, hungering and thirst for righteousness people, pure in heart people, poor in spirit people. But now you see the change from the preamble of the Beatitudes that we've just came out of to today. Now is, how does Jesus' people who have been changed by Him go back into culture and change it? That's what we're facing today. And Jesus, who is the master teacher, only Jesus could do this, serves up two metaphors to describe us and our relationship to the world. Two metaphors that every Jew and every Roman would use every day: salt and light. That is who Jesus calls us, the church, His followers today. And in our time together, I would like to highlight three distinct features of effectiveness for the church. The first degree of effectiveness is what I'd like to call an exclusive effectiveness. And what I mean here is that you'll notice that this metaphor of salt and this metaphor of light is not given to everybody. In fact, if you look at the text that Chris read before, there's actually a contrast between two peoples. There's the salt and the light, and then there's the world. So all this to say, if you're here and you're wondering, what is your purpose in life? What are you called on earth to do as a Christian? This verse gives you that teeth. And that is that you are called to advance the kingdom in the world. You're called to make a difference. You are called to be effective. When I say exclusive effectiveness, Jesus never calls the Kansas City Chiefs salt and light. He does not call Walmart salt and light. He doesn't call Hen House Grocers salt and light. Only his people are called salt and light. You are an exclusive company. You and only you are placed in this world to go back into it to have an effect. You are unlike any other species in the world. There is none other but the Church of Jesus Christ. That leads me into my second characteristic here, and that is not only do you have an exclusive effectiveness, you have a distinct effectiveness. I've already alluded to this. This is the church going back into the world. The world is not salt and light here. Only Christ's disciples are. And so there are two different peoples in these three verses. There is the us and there is the them. And the us is to go build relationships with the them so the them can be affected, the world. Now here, if you're like me, there is a tension. This is nice in principle. This is devilishly hard to perform in everyday life. And I'll give you an example. When I get around unbelievers, and I have to be purposeful to build relationship with unbelievers, because when unbelievers find out I'm a pastor, and particularly a Baptist pastor, then they get moral on me. And I don't want them moral. I want them authentic. And so it's hard. But this happened, and this happened to me recently, only in the last month, with a gentleman. And sure enough, this unbeliever and we start hanging out. And my aim is we're going to hang out ultimately to get him to be a Christian. That's my end game. And we start hanging out, and sure enough, and if it happened once, it's happened 100 times to me. When an unbeliever starts hanging out with me, we go to this place or go to that place and do something of a common interest. They'll invariably say, "You are unlike any pastor I've ever met. You're not judgmental. We actually have common things we can talk about together. You're a really nice guy," and then it will come. They actually say, "You're pretty cool." And I like to think of myself as cool. I certainly don't want to be a jerk. Well, then, when I'm in the cool zone, this is the danger zone for a Christian. Because the unbeliever who at first put his guardrails up to the Baptist pastor now has dropped them. We've begun a relationship where, man, I can be myself around you. You're not going to judge me. You're not hypocritical. You're not always asking me for money like every other pastor, all that type of nonsense. Well, then what I've found is then the sinner goes from arms up, walls up, warms up, now starts to become familiar with me. Familiar with their sin. So now I'm put in a very ticklish situation where the sinner that I've been hanging out for weeks, befriending to get gospel conversations, now begins to talk like a sinner. Begins to use profanity around me like a sinner. Begins to tell me dirty things I don't want to hear like a sinner. Begins to tell me about their worldly passions like a sinner. Begins to do things in front of me. And to associate themselves with sinful things that they only know how. And then I have a decision to make. Who is influencing who in this relationship? And the longer I stay there, without talking about the gospel and without settling in on my convictions, then it becomes quite clear it's the sinner influencing me. Basically telling me, you keep your mouth shut about religion. You don't harass me with your convictions. You keep your principle. I can throw it all in your face by my contact, but you shut up and pipe down. And this, brothers and sisters, is what we struggle with. That's what I mean by the distinction of effectiveness. As Jesus will provocatively say, when salt no longer becomes salt, when light no longer is shining, it's worthless. And so this is a question that we all must say. Who is influencing whom in your relationship with unbelievers? And when you get to the point where unbelievers are silencing you, which is the goal of unbelievers, by the way. I mean, how many times have pagan culture said, would be great if Christians just shut their mouth, pipe down, and go away. But that's what you have to ask when you're now among culture to influence them. Are you being an influence of them, or are you being influenced by them? And if you're being influenced by them, you're no longer salt and light. The third reality, the third of our three, is that the church has a powerful effect. Now we come to the text proper. Jesus says to his people, you are the salt of the earth, and you are the light of the world, which is to me quite curious. In John's gospel, Jesus was the light of the world. But in Matthew's gospel, Jesus says, what I am called, you are. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. In the Greco-Roman world that Jesus lived in, salt was a precious commodity. In fact, both the Greeks and the Romans called salt divine. The Romans held it on the same level as the sun. It was divine. And to illustrate this, when a Roman soldier fought valiantly in battle, and by the way, we do the same thing. We're going to do it tomorrow. Probably there's going to be some ceremonies. There have been some ceremonies all over the weekend of decorating graves and honoring those that have fallen before us. If you have been in active duty, then you have been rewarded for that faithfulness. You've been given a pin, you've been given a pension, you've been given insurance, all deserved for your service to our country. Well, this didn't come just with our country. The Romans did this. And there was a ceremony before Caesar of every Roman soldier who retired from faithful service to the army. And depending on your valor, you might be rewarded with titles, you might be rewarded with land, but every valiant Roman soldier in Caesar's Roman army was given a jar of salt. If you've ever heard the expression, he is not worth his salt, that did not come from Cherie's company, Morton Salt, when it rains it pours, that came from Rome. And it was to connect the reward for valiancy given to every Roman soldier who deserved it. So some Roman soldiers would be withheld their salt for incompetence, insubordination, or cowardice. If you were a coward, you were actually killed. So not every Roman soldier was given salt, only the valiant, only the faithful. And so salt in Jesus' day was a prized commodity. Of course, it was used to add spice and flavor, as we know that today, right? We salt our meat, we salt our baked potato to give it spice, but primarily in the first century world, salt was given to preserve meat from decay or bacteria or corruption or rot. They didn't have freezers back then. They didn't have refrigerators. I still remember my grandfather, born in 1901, who lived primitively on the farm till the day he died, would butcher a hog every year. And this was an all-day process that took the whole family to butcher the whole hog. He'd kill it, he'd put it on a tripod he erected, it would bleed out, and then he would begin the process of butchering it himself. And he'd have this huge cauldron of hot water, and he'd scald the hog in it. That's where you get your lard. That's what you get. Anyone ever heard of or ate cracklins? in this. Oh, there's some of you that, praise God for you. And so you haven't lived till you've eaten fried lard. And the cracklings. And then he would begin the process. And my grandfather, who lived through World War I, lived through World War II, the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, you kept everything. And you kept the pork brains, you kept the hooves, the snout, everything. And he cut out his ham. Now his ham wasn't this little cellophane wrapped ham, you get, wink, wink, made local. No, this was a gigantic ham he would cut out. And he would take it to a house called a smokehouse. And he would put it in a smokehouse, hang it up, and he would cure it by a smoking process. And then he would salt the thunder out of it. And if you saw him insulate this hog with salt, you'd think, this is going to ruin it. No, it was this rock salt. And what he was doing is preserving the meat as best as possible. He didn't have a refrigerator, so he hung it in his smokehouse so that all year he could go to it, cut out any ham that he wanted. It would hang. And preservation of salt slowed down the decaying process. It is a purifying effect. So if you've ever read, for example, Leviticus chapter 2, and when Israel would bring their grain offerings to the altar on the Sabbath, they would place their grain offerings before God, and the priest would take a vial of salt and throw it on the altar as a ceremony of purification. And this is what salt is in Jesus' day. It is a preservation content. And so when he says, you, Calvary, are the salt of the earth, what does that mean? What effect does this have for us? It means that by you, armed with Jesus, going back into the world, preserve the world from the rot gut that they would be going headlong into without the church existing. This is the crazy notion by unbelievers. You probably heard it. The best thing that could happen to American culture is to get rid of the Christians. Go somewhere, be isolated, like the Indians on the reservation, shut up, have your own life, and leave us alone. But if that happened, then the preservation effect of God's people in this world would cease. And the depraved world, who know not the gospel, would go further headlong quicker into the rot gut of doom. So your existence on that job, you going into that school full of pagans, you hanging around your family, is met by your very presence to preserve righteousness to them. This is what salt does. Then, and by the way, the history of human civilization proves this. Why was it in the first 3 centuries of the church, the age of martyrdom, when more Christians were killed for their faith than possibly with the exception of the 20th and 21st century? What was going on? The church was doing good in Roman pagan culture. They were, for example, rescuing babies thrown in the junkyards. And we look at history, who was it who produced the first hospitals in pagan culture? It were Christians. Who was it that built the first orphanages to homeless people? It were Christians. Who was it in history that put together the food banks? It were Christians. Or look at the art. When we see the art of the patristic or the medieval, how much is related to Christianity? When we look at music, think of Johann Sebastian Bach, this master, or Handel, or others that are decidedly Christian, going back into the arts and the fashion and the paintings. Look at literature. Look at some of the technological advances today. Look at who's on the front line of the pro-life movement. If it weren't for Christians, more babies would be slaughtered. And so it's always the Christians that are going back into society as a preservation mechanism for the gospel, without whom pagans would be pagans. This then switches to this metaphor of light. You are light of the world. And then he uses two examples, like a city on a hill, like a candle on a nightstand. Light lights. Light illuminates. That's its purpose. That's the effectiveness of light. Jesus says a city on a hill cannot be hid. We have no idea if he's thinking of Jerusalem. That would be a pretty good guess. Jerusalem, perched on the front end of Mount Masada, high on a hill, could be seen for miles in a day where they didn't have, cars with headlights. They didn't have phones that could flash up. So you're in the dark, meandering around, and you see this high city lit up. And you remember in Jerusalem, it never went completely dark, not in the temple precinct anyway, lit all night. So you were always seeing a city set on a hill. This is why my personal proclivity, if we ever get a new building, so if you got several million, and we move, let us get as high on a hill, not down in this valley where no one knows where we're at, but high on a hill that's lit up where everyone knows where we're at and knows why we're there. That's Jesus' point. Light illuminates. And so light here is the contrast of darkness. We live in a dark world. And light here is the illumination of the gospel truth, shining, giving people sight in the dark, giving people illumination as to how to guide them. If you're like me, and once in a while at night I have to get up and go to the restroom, and I'm the type of person that, like a bear coming out of winter, it takes me a while to wake up. This is why I don't get along with morning people who get up at the crack of dawn, fresh as a daisy. Shut up and give me my coffee. I mean, who did God create you people? I don't understand this. But I mean, the kind that are they're always bouncy. Let's go. And it's 4:38. If I go now, I get a headache. So just leave me be. So at night when I get up, I stumble around and I'm always, I'm not waking up, I'm half awoke, and I'm kind of feeling around the wall to get there, and half the time I run into something and stub my toe. And lights would be good for me. And Jesus talks about the principle of effect. The first is, he puts it negatively. What happens when the church loses their influence on culture? Going back to this salt metaphor, he asks a rhetorical question. It's rhetorical, it's an impossibility. If salt loses its saltiness, how can it be salted again? Well, that's impossible, right? And so Jesus does that. He actually plays on words. He's saying, okay, well, let's get salt that has lost its flavor. Now, he's probably thinking of a very famous salt deposit area in Palestine that was notorious for their salt, but not in a good way. That's the Dead Sea Basin. And the Dead Sea rock salt was hardly edible. It contained large amounts of gypsum and other bad minerals, so it wasn't table salt. If you got a hold of Dead Sea salt in your meat and you bit into your meat, you would know this is not flavorful. And so Jesus' picture is, you do what Mark Twain advised when you get cauliflower. He said, you go to your garden, you cut your cauliflower off, you bring it inside, you salt it, then you open your window and you throw it out. That's what it's good for. And Jesus says the same thing. If salt loses its effectiveness, I found something it's good for. You take it to your local road. You don't put it on your garden or your compost heap. It'll kill it. You take it to your local road. You put it on your road and you hope and pray for an ox and a cart to come by and grind it into oblivion. And it's play on words, I found what it's good for. It's good for nothing. And Jesus really is screwing in the point. This is the good of my disciple that's not an influence in culture. What in the world are you living for? John Piper said in his best-selling title, "You've wasted your life. Go off and collect seashells and think you've done something." You've wasted your life if you're not influencing culture. You're salt. You're there to preserve. And if you've lost your savor, you're good for nothing but to be trodden underfoot of men. And the same thing he says with the light, rather humorous. Who lights a lampstand only to put a blanket over it? You don't do that. You don't put your nightlight on because your kids are scared of the dark only to take your quilt and put it over it. That's crazy. Light is meant to shine. We got lighthouses to keep ships at bay. We have cities lit up to let travelers know where the gas station is. And so he says, you are light, and if you're not shining as light the gospel to the truths of a dark world, what good are you? The positive is, if you're in culture making a difference, then you glorify your Father who is in heaven. You are making a difference. I remember reading a story. This was in the early 20th century. It was a case that involved a family suing a railroad company. And apparently one night, late Friday night, in the wee hours of the morning, a pedestrian was crossing a train track. And when it was too late, a locomotive was coming in the dead of night. And in spite of the train blowing its whistle, struck this pedestrian and killed them. And the family sued the railroad company out of negligence that said, well, at this particular track, there was a railroad house where the switchman should have been there all night, shining a light, waving a lantern, one of those red railroad lanterns, to further identify the coming train to pedestrians. And so the case came down to this switchman. Was he derelict on duty or not? And the prosecution put this switchman, who happened to be a 76-year-old man, a career man for the railroad. And he was in his sunset years. And the prosecutor grilled him. And all the company employment were very nervous because this was just a good old boy. They thought he would break under prosecution and they would be out paying thousands, if not millions back then. I don't know what the suing price was. And the prosecutor came and grilled this guy. Were you in the switchman house on such and such a night, such and such a date? Yes, I was. Were you awake on such and such a night in that house? Yes, I was. Did you hear the train coming? Yes, I did. Did you go outside, which was part of your job, armed with a lantern? Yes, I did. Did you wave your lantern to let passersby know the train was coming? Yes, I did. No further questions, Your Honor. And that cross and examination proved to be the decisive moment of the case. And the people suing the company lost the suit on the basis that the switchman had been in the house, had walked out of the house there at the rail track, armed with his lantern, and waved his lantern. After the railroad company defended successfully and won their case, they brought in the 76-year-old man and breathed a sigh of relief. They say, Bud, we know you're a good old boy, and man, they had 3 prosecutors going after you. We thought you would buckle under pressure. And Bud said, you had no idea. I was hoping he didn't ask me if my waving lantern was lit. Now that story packs a powerful wallop to the church. If we're not careful, we are waving around with a lot of stuff and activities and resolutions and hope-sos, but we're really never shining as lights in a dark world. And we're never becoming salt to preserve it. Now, I want to thank some of the greatest theologians in my life that have made a tremendous impression upon my Christianity. And they both have since long left this world, but they taught me much about God and His Word. And they're not professional theologians. You can't go find a book or a degree or where they're teaching. They were two ladies that every Sunday taught me in children's church. And they used to sing a song that made an indelible impression upon me. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Won't let Satan it out. I'm going to let it shine. Won't let Satan it out. I'm going to let it shine. Won't let Satan it out. I'm going to let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Let it shine till Jesus comes. I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine till Jesus comes. I'm going to let it shine. Let it shine till Jesus comes. I'm going to let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Brothers and sisters, you and you alone are salt of the earth and light of the world. Go and glorify the Father who is in heaven. Father, I thank you for these dear people that join me in trying to navigate through the minefield that is culture, where they bid the rules, they move the goalposts, they have no codes of honor, and yet we're there to be in the world, not away from it, to be in the world and to make a difference. God, deliver us from apathy. Deliver this church from a monastic syndrome. Help us to go, to pray, to evangelize, to become active. This I ask in the sweet name of Jesus, our Lord, and for His sake. Amen.